Hello folks, today we are going to be talking about movement, which is also referred to as diffusion, and human-environment interaction. You should take a moment to make sure that your notes page is set up like this sample one that I have here, and we are going to focus on these two topics. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is movement or diffusion. So what is diffusion? Very simply, it is the spread of people, goods, ideas, or culture across space, right? And this means that it can be spreading from anywhere to anywhere. And geographers use this term to describe how ideas or innovations move from one place to another, and then how those places then become connected. So this could be people and goods that travel from place to place. It could be people who communicate across places, or the spread of products, ideas, information, or culture. So for instance, who started the fidget spinner craze, and how did it spread to where almost everyone has a fidget spinner, right? Or viral videos, where did it start, and how did it spread so that millions of people have watched it? We also see diffusion when we're talking about like the spread of religion, and then another example is like the spread of fashion trends. So in order to understand diffusion, you have to understand some basics about culture. So culture is this really broad term that identifies what makes different groups of people unique. So what do people care about, and what do they take care of? Culture is learned, and it includes material things like clothes or money, or architecture. And then it also includes non-material items like belief systems and values. Think of things like maybe religion as a part of culture. A cultural trait is something else that you need to know. This is a single attribute of culture. So cultural traits combine to make a cultural complex. And then the last kind of term that you need to know around culture is hearths. Hearth. A cultural hearth is an area where a cultural trait develops and where it spreads from or diffuses. So you can see in this map right here, it shows the location of the world's ancient cultural hearths. So the places where you see the blue and purple, that is where civilizations and cultures started. Okay, so let's talk about the two different types of diffusion. The first type of diffusion I want to talk about is relocation diffusion. This is the spread of innovations or ideas through the physical movement of people from place to place. Okay, so this is sometimes from very far away. So you can see this diagram shows the start of something and then it moves, right? The start of something and then it moves. Whereas expansion diffusion is when an innovation or idea develops in a hearth and it stays really strong there while spreading outward as well. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit more in depth here. So relocation diffusion, this is typically happening when we see people migrating. Okay, so this is when people are moving themselves and they bring various aspects of their culture with them. So think about it, if someone relocates to Canada from France, they might bring the French language with them. Some other examples are like the pilgrims coming to America. We see small Chinatowns a lot in big cities. And then refugees coming to the US and bringing maybe their cultural traits like religion, language, and customs, right? Another example of relocation diffusion is the strong German culture and heritage we have here in Cincinnati, because a large amount of German migrants came to Cincinnati, and so we have a lot of German heritage and cultural traits in our society. Think of things like Oktoberfest. Okay, so expansion diffusion is the second type of diffusion, and there are three different types. So remember, this is when an innovation starts at a hearth and then spreads outwards, and it's still popular kind of all over. So the first type is contagious, the second is hierarchical, and then stimulus. So I'm going to talk about these in depth, but you should be familiar with these two graphics here, and we'll continue to look at them. Okay, so contagious expansion diffusion. Okay, this is the rapid, widespread movement of a characteristic throughout a population. Nearly all adjacent individuals are affected. So you can see here is the cultural hearth, and the trait spreads to all of the individuals that are near it, and then the trait then spreads to the individuals near that. So contagious. Think about things like the common cold, right? Popular music, viral videos. I gave you an example of fidget spinners earlier. And here I have the spread of Islam. Okay, so you can kind of see like a real world example on a map. The second type is hierarchical diffusion. This is when innovations or ideas spread first among people who are most connected to that innovation or idea, right? And they spread, well, they're typically a type of powerful person or a powerful place, right? And so typically, we see the spread of something from one distinct place or person down to more connected places or people, and then down to lower connected places or people. So when you think about it, think about kind of like a pyramid, right? You've got one person or one place that's trying to spread this cultural hearth, and they're connected to these people. And so these people spread it to the people that they're connected with, and so on and so forth. And you can see that here on this image. Some examples of this are fashion trends, right? So fashion usually starts in LA or Paris, and then it's moved to kind of smaller but still influential cities like New York City or Milan or Tokyo. And then it's spread down to even smaller cities. So it moves in a hierarchy. Another example are like the necklaces that people wear in baseball. If you're familiar with those, professional athletes started wearing those necklaces, and then other professional athletes did, and then now it's disseminated to people like high schoolers. And then another example is Sperry's, the shoe Sperry's. Here we go. I've got some more examples for you. That was the baseball necklace I was talking to you about. And the shoe Sperry. So these were originally shoes that people wore on yachts and sailboats. They're called top sliders, and you can kind of see the sailboat right there, right? So those are the most connected people to that cultural trait. However, it has diffused down to people who have never even been on a sailboat or a yacht that wear them. You might have a pair of Sperry's. And then one more thing to think about when we're thinking about hierarchical diffusion is who could these powerful people be, right, that are spreading these things. So fashion models, baseball players, the Pope is an example. So think about maybe very influential political leaders or cultural leaders. Okay, and then the last type of expansion diffusion is called stimulus diffusion. This is when we see the underlying principle of an idea spread, even though the cultural trait might need to be modified in some way. Now, this could be due to something called a cultural barrier. And a cultural barrier is something that doesn't allow that trait to necessarily spread exactly. So let's talk about McDonald's, for instance. So When McDonald's spreads to India, they cannot sell hamburgers, right? Because it is taboo for Hindu people to eat beef. So they start making veggie burgers, right? And chicken burgers. So that is an example of a cultural barrier that these people are not allowed to eat this certain type of meat. So then the cultural trait is modified. Another example is in Middle Eastern countries that are predominantly Muslim, we see signs like this that are advertising that McDonald's meat is halal. And what that means is there's a lot of criteria that food and meat specifically need to meet in order for certain adherents of Islam to eat it. So they consider the source, the cause of the animal's death, and how it was processed. So you don't need to know exactly how something's classified as halal, but you do need to know that the meat that is sold in, for instance, Saudi Arabia has to be considered halal before people will buy it from McDonald's. And then another example that doesn't necessarily have to do with a cultural barrier, but in McDonald's in places like the Pacific Islands, like Hawaii and the Philippines, we see taro and pineapple pies rather than what we would see here in the mainland US, like cherry and apple pies. And then one last example that I have for you here is the change from football, F-U-T-B-O-L, right, in South American and European countries to football in the US, which is very distinctly different. Okay, so some factors that may impact interaction among places. First of all, you need to think about accessibility, transportation, and communication connectivity. So the first term that you need to know is time-space compression. And so time-space compression is the increasing sense of accessibility and connectivity, which seems to bring people in really distant places closer together. Okay, and so even though places aren't physically closer, they feel like they are because time has been shortened among places. And some reasons for that are advances in technology, right? People and ideas can spread more rapidly than they have been able to in the past. So think about things like computers, the internet, email, smartphones, all of our social networking sites that we use every day. And then we also have more accessible travel, like air travel is cheaper and is more accessible. People can get around quicker on trains in cities now. So when you think about time-space compression, think about people in really far away places becoming more and more connected. Also, one thing that I want to talk to you about before I move on is the idea of friction of distance or time-distance decay. This is the degree to which distance interferes with interaction, right? And so this is when we see the interaction between two places decline as the distance increases between those places, right? So if we think about a cultural trait spreading, the further a place is from the hearth of that trait, the less likely it is to be adopted there, right? And also think about the longer it takes for that trait to reach a place, the less likely it is to be adopted there. And so this is where we should also consider cultural barriers, like I was talking about earlier, or physical barriers, like mountains, oceans, or deserts. All right, last thing we're going to talk about is human-environmental interaction. And so this is the idea of how do human activities affect their environment, and how does the environment affect human activities? And so the first thing that we want to talk about is cultural ecology, and this is just the study of human-environment interaction. The second thing that we want to talk about is environmental determinism, right? This is the idea that cultures are the direct result of where they exist. So it has to do with the physical traits that are there. This concludes that warmer climates tend to cause people to have kind of a less, they're not as productive. And that would explain why Europeans and those from more temperate climates became more advanced in their civilizations. And then possibilism is the idea, the last term you need to know, that humans are not a product of their environment, and that they possess skills that are necessary to modify their environments to fit their needs. So think about like the city of Las Vegas. It's built in the middle of a desert, but humans have been able to modify that environment enough to provide water to meet the needs of that city.